The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March of 1887, and when Fiona Kensington opened it to discover that her father had left her nothing but a failing cattle ranch in Enid, Oklahoma, she knew her life in Philadelphia was about to change forever. She stood in the parlor of her aunt's townhouse, the crisp paper trembling in her hands as she read the words again. Her father, whom she had not seen in 12 years since he moved west after her mother's death, had passed away from pneumonia. The lawyer's letter was cold and businesslike, explaining that the Red Valley Ranch now belonged to her, along with all its debts and complications. Her aunt peered over her shoulder, made a disapproving sound in her throat, and declared that Fiona should sell the property immediately and use whatever pittance remained to secure a teaching position somewhere respectable. But something stirred in Fiona's chest as she stared at the words on that page. She was 24 years old, unmarried, and living on the charity of relatives who made it clear with every sigh and pointed comment that she was a burden. The ranch represented something she had never had before, a chance to build something of her own, to prove she was more than just another spinster waiting for scraps from the family table. Even if that chance came wrapped in uncertainty and tied with the rope of impossibility. 3 weeks later, Fiona stepped off the train in Enid, her 2 trunks containing everything she owned in the world. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings squatting in the Oklahoma prairie like toys scattered by a careless child. Dust swirled in the streets, and the wind carried the smell of livestock and adventure. She arranged her dark blue traveling dress, adjusted her hat, and tried to look more confident than she felt as she hired a wagon to take her to the ranch. The driver, an older man with a face like weathered leather, studied her with obvious skepticism. "You the Kensington girl?" he asked, and when she nodded, he shook his head slowly. "Your daddy had a hard time of it out there, lost most of his cattle last winter, got into debt with half the town. No offense, miss, but that ranch needs a firm hand and a lot of hard work. Then it is fortunate that I have 2 hands and am not afraid of work," Fiona replied, lifting her chin despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. The ranch, when they finally reached it after an hour's drive across rolling prairie, was worse than she had imagined. The main house sagged like a tired old woman, its paint peeling and several shutters hanging at odd angles. The barn needed repairs, several sections of fence had fallen, and the few cattle she could see looked thin and scattered across the brown grass. Her father's debts suddenly made perfect sense. This place was not just failing, it was practically dead already. She paid the driver and stood alone in the yard as his wagon disappeared back toward town. The wind tugged at her skirts and whispered through the empty spaces between buildings. For a moment, the enormity of what she had done crashed over her like a wave. She was alone, hundreds of miles from anything familiar, standing in front of a disaster that she had no idea how to fix. But she had burned her bridges in Philadelphia. There was nowhere to go but forward. The house was dusty and full of ghosts. Her father's belongings were still scattered around, his coat hanging by the door, his coffee cup unwashed on the table. Fiona spent the first night cleaning, scrubbing away the grime and trying not to think about the man she barely remembered living in these rooms. She found papers in his desk that confirmed what the lawyer had told her: mortgages, debts to the feed store, loans from the bank. The numbers swam before her eyes, astronomical and terrifying. The next morning she put on her plainest dress and walked into town. The bank was her first stop. Mr. Hendricks, the banker, was a portly man with suspicious eyes who looked at her as though she had crawled out from under a rock. When she explained who she was and asked about the terms of her father's loans, He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands across his substantial belly. "Miss Kensington, I will be frank with you. Your father owed this bank nearly $3,000. The ranch is worth perhaps half that in its current condition. I had hoped to settle this matter with the estate, but since you have inherited the property, the debt falls to you." He paused, letting that sink in. "I would advise you to sign the ranch over to the bank. We will forgive the remaining debt and you can return to wherever you came from with a clear conscience." "And if I wish to keep the ranch?" Fiona asked, though her mouth had gone dry. Mr. Hendricks smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then you would need to bring the account current within 6 months. That means $3,000 plus interest. Miss Kensington, no woman can run a cattle ranch alone, especially not one in such poor condition. Be sensible." Fiona left the bank with her spine straight and her hands clenched in her skirts. She made similar stops at the feed store and the general store, introducing herself and learning the extent of what her father owed. By afternoon, she felt like she was drowning in numbers and doubt. She sat on a bench outside the general store, trying to sort through everything in her mind when a shadow fell across her. "You look like someone just told you the world was ending," a voice said, and she looked up to see a man standing there, hat in hand, with concern in his gray eyes. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and brown hair that needed cutting. He wore dusty work clothes and had the easy, balanced stance of someone who spent his life on horseback. Something about his face was open and honest, and when he smiled at her tentatively, Fiona felt some of the tension in her chest ease slightly. "I am Fiona Kensington," she said, because it seemed important to establish who she was. "I inherited the Red Valley Ranch." "I know," he said, and sat down on the bench beside her without asking permission, which should have been rude but somehow was not. "I am Grant Vance. I worked for your father for about 6 months before he passed. I am sorry for your loss." Fiona studied him, this cowboy who had known her father more recently than she had. What kind of man was he? Grant considered the question seriously. Proud, stubborn. He would not ask for help even when he needed it, and he made some poor decisions because of it. "But he loved this land, Miss Kensington. He talked about you sometimes, wondered if you would ever want to see what he had built out here." He paused. "He would have been glad to know you came." The unexpected kindness in his words made Fiona's eyes sting. She blinked hard and looked away, focusing on the dusty street. "Everyone seems quite certain that I should sell the ranch and leave. Apparently, no woman can run a cattle operation." "Can you?" Grant asked, and there was no mockery in his tone, only genuine curiosity. "I do not know," Fiona admitted. "I know nothing about ranching. I can read and write and do mathematics. I can manage a household budget, but cattle and horses and all of this." She gestured vaguely at the prairie stretching around them. "I am completely ignorant." Grant was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. Then he said, "Ignorance can be fixed with learning. The question is whether you want to learn." "I do," Fiona said, surprised by the fierceness in her own voice. "I did not come all this way just to give up because it is difficult. But I do not even know where to begin." Grant looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and said, "Miss Kensington, that ranch needs work, a lot of it, but it is not impossible. Your father's problems came from a hard winter and some bad luck, not from anything wrong with the land itself. With the right management and enough hard work, Red Valley could be profitable again." "That does not help me with the $3,000 I owe the bank in 6 months, Fiona said bitterly. "No," Grant agreed, "but it means there is a chance if you are willing to fight for it." He stood up, put his hat back on, and looked down at her. "I will make you an offer. Let me stay on at the ranch and help you. I will work for room and board for now, and a proper wage once you can afford it. I will teach you everything I know about running a cattle operation. And when folks say you cannot do it because you are a woman, you can show them what you are made of. I believe you can, Miss Kensington, if you are determined enough. Fiona stared up at him, this stranger offering her exactly what she needed most, help and faith. Why would you do that? Grant smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Because I need work, and because I hate seeing good land go to waste, and maybe because I think it would be satisfying to watch you prove all these doubters wrong. She made her decision in that moment, standing up and extending her hand to shake his. Then, I accept your offer, Mr. Vance. When can you start? I will ride out tomorrow morning, he said, and his grip was firm and warm. That night, Fiona lay awake in her father's house, which was now her house, and felt the first flicker of something that might have been hope. She had an ally now, someone who believed she could succeed. She did not quite believe it herself yet, but perhaps that would come with time. Grant arrived at dawn the next day, his horse loaded with his belongings. He moved into the small bunkhouse near the barn and immediately set to work assessing the damage and planning repairs. Fiona followed him everywhere, notebook in hand, writing down everything he told her. He showed her the cattle, explaining how to judge their condition and health. He taught her about grass and water rights, about the seasonal movements of the herd, about the endless cycle of work that kept a ranch running. Your father had about 200 head before the winter, Grant explained as they rode out to check the scattered cattle. He lost maybe 60 to the cold and lack of feed. The rest are here somewhere, but they are spread out and some of them are probably mixed in with neighboring herds. We need to gather them, brand the calves that were born this spring, and get an accurate count. How do we do that? Fiona asked, trying not to feel overwhelmed. Roundup, Grant said. Hard work, long days, and we will need help. I can hire some temporary hands from town, men I trust who will work for fair wages. Over the following weeks, Fiona threw herself into learning with a desperation born of necessity. Grant was a patient teacher, showing her how to sit a horse properly, how to rope a calf, how to read the weather and the land. She fell more times than she could count, bruised herself in a dozen places, and went to bed each night so exhausted she could barely move. But slowly, gradually, things began to improve. The roundup took 10 days of brutal work. Grant hired 4 men from town, weathered cowboys who looked at Fiona with open skepticism, until she proved she was willing to work alongside them. She learned to chase cattle through rough country, to separate calves from their mothers for branding, to keep working even when every muscle screamed for rest. The men stopped making jokes about her after the 3rd day, when she roped her first calf cleanly, and refused to quit even when her hands were bleeding from the rough rope. Grant was always there, watching her with those steady gray eyes, offering advice when she needed it and stepping back to let her figure things out when she did not. He never doubted her, never suggested she should give up or let the men handle things. When she succeeded, he nodded with satisfaction. When she failed, he helped her understand why and encouraged her to try again. One evening after a particularly difficult day, they sat on the porch of the main house as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. Fiona's entire body ached, and she knew she smelled of horse and dust and sweat, but she felt more alive than she ever had in Philadelphia. You did well today, Grant said quietly, rolling a cigarette. That steer you roped was ornery as hell, but you held on. I nearly lost my seat 3 times, Fiona said, but she was smiling despite herself. But you did not lose it. Grant lit his cigarette and exhaled smoke into the cooling air. You are learning fast, Miss Kensington, faster than most. Fiona, she said impulsively. You should call me Fiona. Miss Kensington sounds too formal for someone who has seen me covered in mud and cow manure. Grant turned to look at her, and something warm flickered in his eyes. All right then, Fiona. And you should call me Grant. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. Fiona found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, the solid reality of him. Over the weeks they had worked together, she had come to rely on him for more than just his knowledge of ranching. He was steady and calm when she felt panicked, confident when she doubted herself. And somewhere along the way, she had started noticing other things. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands, the sound of his laugh. The realization that she was developing feelings for him struck her like lightning, sudden and illuminating. She turned to study his profile in the fading light, this cowboy who had appeared exactly when she needed him most. He must have felt her gaze because he looked over at her, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other while something unspoken passed between them. "I should check on the horses," Grant said finally, his voice slightly rough. He stood up quickly and disappeared toward the barn, leaving Fiona alone with her racing heart. The roundup confirmed that they had about 130 cattle left, with 40 healthy calves. It was not as bad as Fiona had feared, but it was not enough to pay off her debts in 6 months either. She spent an entire evening working through the numbers, trying to find a solution that did not exist in the mathematics. Grant found her at the kitchen table near midnight, surrounded by papers and looking despairing. "You need to sleep," he said gently. "I need to find a way to make the impossible possible," Fiona replied. "Even if I sell every head of cattle we have, I will not have enough to pay the bank. I would need twice as many animals, or I would need the price of beef to suddenly double." Grant pulled out a chair and sat across from her. In the lamplight, his face was serious and thoughtful. "There might be another way. It is risky, but it could work." "Tell me." "A cattle drive," Grant said. "Instead of selling to the local buyers who will lowball you, because they know you are desperate, we drive the herd north to Kansas. The railhead in Dodge City pays top dollar, especially for cattle that have been trail hardened. If we can get our cattle there in good condition, you might make enough to settle your debts and have capital left over to rebuild." Fiona felt a surge of hope, followed immediately by doubt. "How far is Dodge City?" "About 200 miles, maybe 3 weeks on the trail." "It is hard work and dangerous. We would need to hire drovers, buy supplies, navigate through territory that can be unpredictable. But the payoff could save your ranch." "When would we need to leave?" "Within the month, to reach Dodge City while the market is still strong." "That means we need to move fast, get organized, make preparations." Fiona looked down at her hands, calloused now from weeks of ranch work. A cattle drive was the stuff of stories, dangerous and wild, but she had not come all this way to play it safe. "Then we will do it. Tell me what we need." The next weeks passed in a blur of frantic preparation. Grant hired 6 drovers, experienced men who knew the trail north. They gathered supplies, planned their route, and made sure every animal was strong enough for the journey. Fiona spent her remaining money on provisions and gear, betting everything on this one desperate gamble. The night before they were set to leave, Grant found Fiona in the barn checking equipment one last time. She was nervous, unable to sleep, her mind racing with all the things that could go wrong. "Having second thoughts?" Grant asked, leaning against a stall door. "Third and fourth thoughts," Fiona admitted. "What if we lose cattle along the way? What if we get to Dodge City and the market has collapsed? What if I have made a terrible mistake?" Grant crossed to her, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. "Then we will deal with it. But Fiona, you have come so far already. You have learned more in 2 months than most people learn in years. You have earned the respect of the men who are riding with us. You are stronger than you know." "I do not feel strong," she whispered. "I feel terrified." "Strength is not the absence of fear," Grant said softly. "It is moving forward despite it, and you have been doing that since the day you arrived here." He hesitated, then reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm and rough against hers. "I believe in you, Fiona. I have from the beginning. You can do this." The touch of his hand sent warmth flooding through her. Without thinking, acting on pure instinct and need, Fiona stepped closer and kissed him. For one frozen moment, Grant went still with surprise. Then his arms came around her, and he kissed her back with an intensity that stole her breath. His hands gentle despite the strength in them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "But I did not want to presume, did not want to take advantage of you needing my help." "You have never taken advantage," Fiona said, her hands clutched in his shirt. "You have given me everything I needed and asked for nothing in return. And somewhere along the way, I started falling for you, Grant Vance." He kissed her again, slower this time, tender and full of promise. "I fell for you the day I saw you on that bench, looking lost and determined at the same time. I have never met anyone like you, Fiona." They stood in the barn holding each other as the horses shifted in their stalls and the night wind whispered outside. Tomorrow they would start a dangerous journey with everything on the line. But tonight, Fiona felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt loved, and she felt like no matter what happened, she would not face it alone. The cattle drive began at first light. They pushed the herd north across the Oklahoma prairie, following trails that had been used for decades by other cattlemen driving their herds to market. The work was relentless and exhausting. Fiona rode from dawn until dusk, eating dust and learning to anticipate the movements of the cattle. Grant was always nearby, managing the drive with quiet authority, making decisions that kept them moving forward. The drovers had been skeptical about taking orders from a woman, but Grant made it clear from the start that Fiona was the owner and her word was law. She earned their grudging respect by working as hard as any of them, never complaining, and proving she could handle whatever the trail threw at her. They crossed rivers swollen with spring runoff, the cattle bawling in protest as the drovers forced them into the water. They endured thunderstorms that turned the prairie into mud and sent lightning crashing around them. They dealt with injuries and exhaustion and the constant threat of losing cattle to predators or accidents. Every day brought new challenges that tested Fiona's resolve. But there were beautiful moments too. Sunrises that painted the sky in impossible colors. Nights around the campfire when the men told stories and sang old trail songs. The satisfaction of making camp after a successful day, knowing they were miles closer to their goal. And always, there was Grant, his steady presence keeping her grounded. They stole moments together when they could, brief conversations during night watch, shared glances across the campfire, the occasional touch of hands when no one was looking. Their relationship remained mostly private, something precious that belonged just to them, but Fiona knew the drovers had figured it out. She caught knowing looks and small smiles, but no one said anything. As long as the work got done, what happened between the boss and her foreman was their own business. 2 weeks into the drive, they encountered another trail herd moving north. The other outfit's trail boss was a grizzled man named Roscoe who looked Fiona up and down with obvious surprise when Grant introduced her as the owner of Red Valley Ranch. "A woman running a drive," Roscoe said, not quite managing to keep the skepticism from his voice. "That is something you do not see every day." "She is doing a fine job of it too," Grant said, his tone carrying an edge of warning, Fiona stepped forward before the situation could escalate. "Mr. Roscoe, I understand this is unusual, but my cattle are in good condition, my outfit is well managed, and we are making good time. I would appreciate being judged on those merits rather than on my gender." Roscoe studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Fair enough, miss. The trail does not care whether you are man or woman, only whether you can get the job done. Safe travels to you." As they parted ways, Grant rode up beside Fiona with pride written all over his face. "Well handled." "I am getting tired of having to prove myself to every man I meet," Fiona said, but she was smiling slightly. "Then keep proving them wrong until they run out of doubts," Grant replied. "You are doing exactly that." They reached the Kansas border on the 16th day. Fiona felt a surge of accomplishment mixed with anxiety. They were close now, but Dodge City was still several days away, and she would not feel safe until the cattle were sold and the money was in hand. That night, unable to sleep, Fiona walked out beyond the camp to where Grant was keeping watch. The prairie stretched around them, silver in the moonlight, peaceful and vast. Grant smiled when he saw her approach and patted the ground beside him. "Could not sleep?" he asked. "Too much thinking," Fiona admitted, settling down next to him. "About what happens when we get to Dodge City. About whether the prices will be good enough. About what I will do if they are not." Grant was quiet for a moment, watching the cattle settle for the night. Then he said, "Whatever happens, you will handle it. You are one of the most capable people I have ever met, Fiona. Man or woman, it does not matter. You have grit and intelligence and determination. Those things count for a lot." "I could not have done any of this without you," Fiona said, turning to look at him. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. You believed in me. Why?" Grant met her eyes, and in the moonlight, his expression was completely open. "At first, it was because I saw someone who needed help and I could provide it. But then I got to know you, saw how hard you were willing to work, how you never gave up even when things were terrible. You inspired me, Fiona, made me want to be part of something bigger than just drifting from job to job." He paused, then added softly, "And I fell in love with you. Somewhere between teaching you to rope and watching you face down skeptical cowboys, I fell completely in love." Fiona felt her breath catch. They had danced around their feelings, shared kisses and meaningful looks, but neither had spoken the words aloud until now. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling right and true. "I did not expect to find this when I came west. I thought I would be alone, fighting everything by myself. But you have been beside me every step, and I cannot imagine doing this without you anymore." Grant reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "When this drive is over and the ranch is secure, I want to talk about the future. Our future together, if that is something you want." "It is," Fiona whispered. "It absolutely is." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and for those moments the whole world narrowed down to just the two of them. Out on the prairie under the stars, they made promises without words, commitments that felt as binding as any spoken vow. They reached Dodge City on the 19th day of the drive. The town was bigger than Enid, bustling with activity as trail herds converged from all directions. The stockyards were full of cattle, and the air rang with the sounds of men shouting, livestock bawling, and the constant activity of commerce. Fiona's heart hammered as they drove their cattle into the pens and waited for the buyers to assess them. Grant stood beside her, his presence steadying her as men walked through the herd, judging condition and quality. Finally, a buyer named Thompson approached with an offer. $22 a head for the mature cattle, $12 for the calves, he said. "Your stock is in decent shape considering they just came off a drive. That is a fair price." Fiona did the mathematics quickly in her head. It was more than she had dared hope for, enough to pay off all her debts with something left over. Relief flooded through her so intensely she felt dizzy. "We accept," she said, managing to keep her voice steady despite wanting to shout with joy. The sale was concluded with paperwork and a bank draft that Fiona clutched like a lifeline. As they walked away from the stockyards, Grant suddenly grabbed her around the waist and spun her in a circle, both of them laughing like children. "You did it," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "Fiona, you actually did it." "We did it," she corrected, throwing her arms around his neck. Right there in the middle of Dodge City, not caring who saw, she kissed him thoroughly. The drovers whooped and hollered, and passers-by smiled at the obvious celebration. That night, after paying the drovers their wages with generous bonuses, Fiona and Grant got a room at the Dodge House Hotel. It was the first real bed Fiona had slept in for weeks, the first night without the sounds of cattle and the smell of campfire smoke. They lay together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about the future. "I want to build the ranch into something successful," Fiona said, her head on Grant's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Not just surviving, but actually thriving. I want to prove that a woman can run a cattle operation as well as any man." "You have already proven that," Grant said, his fingers trailing through her hair. "But I understand wanting more. The ranch has good land, good water. With the debts paid off, you can invest in breeding stock, improve the infrastructure, build something lasting." "Will you stay?" Fiona asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know you said you wanted to talk about the future, but Grant, I need to know. Is this just a job for you, or is it more?" Grant shifted so he could look down at her, his expression serious. "Fiona Kensington, I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. I do not want to just work for you. I want to build a life with you if you will have me. I want to be your partner in every way that matters." Tears stung Fiona's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it. I love you, Grant. I want to marry you and build a life together." He kissed her then, tender and full of promise, and they sealed their commitment to each other in the privacy of that hotel room. The future stretched before them, full of possibility and hope. They returned to Enid triumphant. Fiona walked into the bank and paid off every cent she owed, along with the interest. Mr. Hendricks could barely hide his surprise and disappointment. She settled her debts at the feed store and the general store, establishing her credit as someone who paid what she owed. Word spread quickly through town about the successful cattle drive. The woman who everyone had expected to fail within weeks had not only survived, but succeeded against considerable odds. Fiona felt the shift in how people looked at her now. There was still skepticism from some, but there was also grudging respect. She and Grant spent the summer rebuilding the ranch. They repaired fences and buildings, bought good breeding stock, hired 2 permanent hands to help with the work. Fiona proved she could manage the business side as well as the physical labor, negotiating contracts and managing finances with the same determination she had shown on the trail. In August, they were married by the circuit preacher in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Fiona wore a cream-colored dress she had ordered from a catalog, and Grant wore his best clothes, his hair freshly cut for the occasion. The ranch hands attended, along with a few people from town who had become friends. It was not the grand society wedding her aunt back in Philadelphia would have expected, but it was perfect for them. "I take you as my husband," Fiona said, her hands clasped in Grant's, her voice steady and sure. "My partner, my love, my home." "I take you as my wife," Grant replied, his gray eyes shining with emotion. "My heart, my courage, my future." They kissed to the cheers of their small gathering, and Fiona felt a completeness she had never experienced before. She had found not just success and independence, but love and partnership. Everything she had fought for had led her to this moment, standing beside the man she loved on land that belonged to them both. The first year of their marriage was hard work but deeply satisfying. They learned to work together in every aspect of running the ranch, combining Fiona's education and business acumen with Grant's practical knowledge and experience. They disagreed sometimes, had arguments about the best way to handle various situations, but they always worked through it together. In the spring of 1888, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She worried about how pregnancy would affect her ability to work, about whether she could balance being a mother with running a ranch. But Grant was ecstatic and supportive, insisting they would figure it out together. "You have done impossible things already," he said, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "You will be an amazing mother, and the ranch will survive you taking time for our child. We are partners, remember? I can handle things when you need to rest." Their son was born in November, a healthy baby boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They named him Samuel Thomas Vance, and Fiona fell in love all over again the moment she held him. Grant was a devoted father from the start, taking on extra work so Fiona could recover and bond with their baby. The ranch continued to grow. By 1890, they had built Red Valley into one of the most successful cattle operations in the area. Fiona's success had paved the way for other women to be taken more seriously in business, though she was still an exception rather than the rule. She did not mind being exceptional as long as she was respected. Samuel grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. Watching Grant teach their son the same things he had once taught her filled Fiona with deep contentment. This was the life they had built together, something solid and real. In the spring of 1891, Fiona gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara Grace. She had her father's temperament, calm and observant, and from the beginning it was clear she had inherited both her parents' determination. One evening when Clara was a few months old, Fiona and Grant sat on the porch watching Samuel play in the yard. The ranch spread around them, prosperous and well managed. The house had been repaired and expanded, the barns were in good condition, and cattle grazed peacefully across rolling pastures. "Do you ever think about how different your life would be if you had never come here?" Grant asked, bouncing Clara gently in his arms. Fiona considered the question. "Sometimes. I would probably still be living with my aunt in Philadelphia, teaching perhaps, or doing needlework and attending tedious social functions. Unmarried, unfulfilled, living half a life." She turned to smile at him. "Instead, I have this. A ranch I built with my own hands, a husband I love desperately, 2 beautiful children, and a future I helped create. I would not trade it for anything." Grant reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "That day in town when I offered to help you, I had no idea how completely you would change my life. I was just a drifting cowboy with no real ties to anything. You gave me purpose, a home, a family. You made me believe in the possibility of building something permanent." "We built it together," Fiona said, squeezing his hand. "Every bit of it. You believed in me when no one else did. You told me to show them what I was made of, and you stood beside me while I did exactly that. I could not have succeeded without you." "You would have found a way," Grant said with certainty. "You are the strongest person I know, but I am grateful every day that you let me be part of your journey." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Samuel ran over demanding a story before bed, and Clara started to fuss for her feeding. They went inside together, the family they had created, into the home they had built over the years that followed, Red Valley Ranch became known throughout Oklahoma as a model operation. Fiona took on a leadership role in local ranching associations, advocating for fair prices and better breeding practices. She never forgot what it felt like to be dismissed and underestimated, and she made a point of helping other newcomers, regardless of gender, who were trying to make their way in the ranching business. Grant managed the day-to-day operations with quiet competence, respected by their employees and their neighbors. He never seemed to mind that his wife was often the public face of their ranch, understanding that her journey and her success were remarkable and worth celebrating. He was secure enough in himself and their partnership that he took pride in her accomplishments rather than feeling threatened by them. Samuel and Clara grew up learning the ranch business from both parents. Samuel was gentle with animals and showed an aptitude for breeding and animal husbandry. Clara was fierce and competitive, loving the physical work of herding and roping. Fiona made sure both children understood that they could pursue whatever path called to them, but also that the ranch would always be their legacy and their home. In 1895, when Fiona was 32 years old and had been running Red Valley Ranch for 8 years, she received a letter from her aunt in Philadelphia. The older woman was ill and wanted to reconcile before she died. Fiona traveled east with Grant and the children, letting them see the world she had left behind. Philadelphia felt strange and confining after years in Oklahoma. The city was crowded and noisy, the social rules suffocating. Her aunt, frail now and confined to bed, looked at Fiona with new eyes. "You have done well for yourself," the older woman said, studying Fiona's sun-weathered face and confident bearing. "I thought you were making a terrible mistake going west. I expected you to come crawling back within months, broken and desperate." "I nearly did fail," Fiona admitted, sitting beside the bed. "It was harder than anything I had ever done, but I had help when I needed it most, and I learned that I was capable of far more than I believed." Her aunt's gaze drifted to Grant, who was in the parlor with the children. "He seems like a good man, different from what I would have chosen for you, but good." "He is the best man I have ever known," Fiona said simply. "He saw my potential when I could not see it myself. He believed in me." "And do you love him?" her aunt asked. "More than I can possibly express," Fiona replied. "He is my partner in everything. We built a life together from nothing, and every day I am grateful for him." Her aunt nodded slowly. "Then I was wrong about you, about what you needed, about what would make you happy. I am sorry I did not support you when you decided to go." They made peace before Fiona returned to Oklahoma. Her aunt died a few months later, leaving Fiona a small inheritance that Fiona used to build a school in Enid so local children, including her own, would have access to education without traveling far. The years rolled on, marked by the seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. There were good years and hard years, times of plenty and times when they had to fight for every advantage. But through it all, Fiona and Grant remained partners, facing everything together. In 1898, they celebrated 10 years of marriage with a party at the ranch that drew people from across the county. The house rang with laughter and music, and Fiona stood in the middle of it, all feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. She found Grant outside on the porch, escaping the crowd for a moment of peace. "Hiding?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. "Just thinking," Grant replied, pulling her close. 10 years ago, you were a scared young woman standing in town with the weight of the world on your shoulders. Look at you now, look at what you have built." "What we have built," Fiona corrected automatically. "I never could have done this alone, Grant. You know that." "Maybe not," he conceded. "But you would have found a way. You have never been the kind of person who accepts defeat." Fiona leaned against him, watching the stars appear overhead. Do you remember what you told me that first day? That I should show them what I was made of, that you believed in me." "I remember every word of that conversation," Grant said softly. "Those words changed my life," Fiona said. "They gave me the courage to try, to keep going even when it seemed impossible. You gave me that gift, Grant, the gift of believing in myself because you believed in me first." Grant turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "And you gave me a home and a purpose, and a love I never expected to find. We saved each other, Fiona. That is what we did." They kissed in the starlight, surrounded by the sounds of celebration from inside the house, standing on land they had fought for and won. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had built something beautiful and lasting together. As they walked back inside hand in hand, Fiona caught sight of their reflection in the window. She saw a woman who was strong and capable, weathered by sun and wind and work, standing beside a man who looked at her like she hung the moon. She saw partners, lovers, parents, friends. She saw a life fully lived, a journey that had taken her from uncertainty to confidence, from loneliness to love. Samuel was 19 now, tall and serious, already talking about expanding their breeding program. Clara was 17, fierce and independent, determined to prove she could manage the ranch as well as any man, just like her mother. They were good children, raised with love and the knowledge that they could achieve anything they set their minds to. The ranch sprawled around them, hundreds of acres of productive land that would continue to sustain the family for generations. The Red Valley brand was known throughout Oklahoma and beyond as a mark of quality. Fiona had taken her father's failing dream and transformed it into something that would outlast them all. But more than any of that, more than the success or the respect or the financial security, Fiona had found love. Real, deep, abiding love with a cowboy who had looked past her gender and inexperience to see the potential underneath. Grant had given her faith in herself, had stood beside her through every challenge, had loved her completely and without reservation. On quiet evenings, they still sat on the porch like they had in those early days, talking about the future and remembering the past. They told each other stories about the cattle drive, about the struggles of those first months, about falling in love while building a dream. And they held hands, these two people who had beaten the odds and proved all the doubters wrong. When they were old, with grandchildren playing in the yard and Samuel running the ranch with Clara's help, Fiona and Grant would still steal moments together. They would walk out to the far pasture where they could see the whole ranch spread out before them, and they would marvel at what they had created. "I never believed I could do this," Fiona would say, the same conversation they had been having for decades. "When I first arrived, it seemed impossible." And Grant would pull her close and reply, as he always did, "But I believed, and I was right." They grew old together on the land they loved, surrounded by family and the legacy they had built. And when Fiona passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76, with Grant holding her hand, her last thoughts were of that day in Enid when a cowboy had offered her hope and changed her entire world. Grant followed her 2 years later, his heart finally giving out as he worked in the barn he had helped build so many decades before. Their children buried them side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky as wide and blue as the one that had witnessed their love story from the beginning. The Red Valley Ranch continued to thrive for generations, a testament to the woman who had refused to accept defeat and the man who had believed in her when no one else would. Their story became legend in Oklahoma, told and retold about how a woman with nothing but determination and a cowboy with faith in her potential had built an empire together. But to those who had known them, who had seen them together over the years. It was not really a story about a ranch or success or proving doubters wrong. It was a love story, pure and simple. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had built a life together based on mutual respect, absolute trust, and a love that had only deepened with time. And that love, more than anything else they had accomplished, was their greatest achievement and their most enduring legacy.